Why are you not connected? All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Invertebrate Investigations. I'm Kayla, and this month we are talking all about corals. Corals. But before we get started, if you aren't already subscribed to Butterfly Pavilion's channel, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We have the best sort of notifications, which are notifications about really awesome animals for you to learn about. So I am keeping an eye on the chat. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to just pop those in the chat while we're going along, and I'll answer them at the end. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, what are corals? They're really strange animals. So corals are, in fact, animals, not plants. They are alive. They are animals in the phylum Cnidaria. So this phylum also includes sea anemones and jellyfish. So a little bit of diversity there. They actually are fairly similar once you start looking at them. And they all have those distinctive stinging cells that make touching them maybe not so great. And when it comes to corals, there are two types. There are hard and soft corals. So the ones we mostly hear about are those ones that create the coral reefs, and those are your hard corals. The ones that create those calcium carbonate structures that become a reef. Soft corals, however, they have kind of smaller internal structures. They tend to not congregate and live in as large of colonies, but their basic anatomy is the same. So a coral reef is made up of thousands of individual coral polyps. And so you have these individual animals. And if you've ever seen preserved coral, we're pretty much just looking at that calcium carbonate skeleton that they have created. So they pull in that calcium carbonate from the ocean and then use it to create that structure. And so that's what creates your reef. And then on that little skeleton, in each little cup, there are little individual polyps. And so these polyps do have mouths in the top, and they have little tentacles. And then inside each polyp, they have a symbiotic relationship with some algae, which is called zooxanthellae. Zooxanthellae. It's difficult to pronounce, zooxanthellae. So they are algae that live within the corals, and they have a symbiotic relationship. So a lot of the nutrition from a coral does come from these zooxanthellae. But they also can use their tentacles to grab stuff out of the water and pull it into their mouths. So this is a time-lapse video from some of the corals we have in our collection here at Butterfly Pavilion. This is a smooth flower coral, and this is sped up, so you can see them kind of undulating. It doesn't happen this fast. You usually have to watch for a very long time to see sort of what we would consider direct or intentional movement. All right. And so corals are really interesting animals, and they are very, very important for our oceans. So this symbiotic relationship they have, the mutualistic relationship, the coral polyps, they get nutrition from the zooxanthellae. And then the zooxanthellae pretty much has a space to live. Now, probably a lot of you have heard about coral bleaching. Like, what does that even mean? So, under situations of stress, the coral polyps will actually eject the zooxanthellae out of their bodies. So that can happen with typically higher temperatures, though any sort of environmental stressor can cause this. So if climate change is the biggest reason we see coral bleaching happening, but extremely cold temperatures can also cause this, as well as pollution, so poor water quality, or just sort of physical intervention, so damage from boats or from people can cause that bleaching. And so bleached coral is not automatically dead coral. They can recover from bleaching events. However, it can be difficult to do so because they're losing basically their primary food source. Um, and so that can be really distressing for that coral, and it can't always bounce back. Um, and you may be thinking, okay, well, how does this affect me, right? Especially if you are in a landlocked state like I am. I live in Colorado. I'm nowhere near the beach. I'm nowhere near where corals live. So why should this matter to me? Why should I care about this? But it can affect us. In lots of different ways. So coral reefs are biodiversity hotspots, especially tropical coral reefs. So they support marine biodiversity. We think that about 25% of marine life lives within coral reefs. So think about how vast the oceans are, right? And corals, because they need sunlight for those zooxanthellae to photosynthesize and produce food. They're usually in shallow, warm waters, so right off coasts. And a lot of our ocean life lives in these spaces. It's really incredible. And if you look at the photo that I have up here, this is what a healthy coral reef should look like, right? There should be lots of fish. There should be lots of color. There should be lots of invertebrates living in here. And that's what we want to see. We want to see that level of biodiversity. They also support food webs. So again, all these animals coming to live within these reefs, they are, very important, right? Food sources for other animals, from starting basically from the bottom, plankton up to small microinvertebrates to macroinvertebrates up to fish, and then even humans, right? We rely on the ocean for a lot of our food. And without our coral reefs, that would pretty much collapse. They're also important for oxygen production. So the algae that lives within the coral polyps, they are photosynthesizing. And so they are pulling carbon dioxide from the ocean, and then they are producing oxygen. So that's really important for the health of our oceans, especially because with climate change, we are seeing ocean acidification, so higher carbon dioxide content in the water instead of oxygen. So that just kind of throws everything off balance, and including the life that lives there, right? Fish and aquatic invertebrates, they need oxygen just like we do. They just process it a little bit differently. They're pulling oxygen from the water instead of from the air. And so, without all this algae that is photosynthesizing, it can be really difficult for these creatures to survive. It's also really important for coastal protection. So the ocean is a huge force, right? Hitting the coast can cause a lot of coastal erosion. But if we have our barrier reefs in place, so just like off the coast of Florida, or think of the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia, it's going to kind of absorb some of that impact, and so that we're not seeing coastal erosion quite as bad. So that's going to protect our beaches, which is good for the environment, and it's also good for tourism and commerce. In your tropical areas, reef tourism is a huge thing. It's a huge thing. People want to go and see it. They want to go diving or snorkeling and see that. Even without the reefs, beaches are a huge place for tourism. I love the beach. Who doesn't love the beach? It's great for vacationing or for relaxing. And without our reefs, our beaches are going to be at risk, right? With that erosion, the beaches are going to shrink. You're going to see more environmental damage just in these areas overall. So what can we do to protect our reefs? So here at Butterfly Pavilion, we actually are part of the Florida Reef Tract Rescue Project. And so we are one of two institutions in Colorado, but this is all across the United States. Institutions like Butterfly Pavilion and the Denver Zoo are kind of holding places for corals. And this actually kind of came about because there is a disease that is affecting corals called stony coral tissue loss. We're not entirely sure what causes it. We think it's bacterial, potentially viral, but in addition to climate change and pollution and all other environmental concerns, we also have this disease that are affecting our corals. So we are kind of like a holding facility, right? We have multiple species of corals that we are keeping here in our facility so that in the event of extirpation in the wild, whether that's from climate change or from this tissue loss disease, we can help reintroduce those corals. So we're pretty much taking care of them, managing them, and then in the event of some sort of wild extinction event, we can use the corals in our facility and other holding facilities across the United States to repopulate those wild corals, so using them for breeding and repopulate that. Other things that people can do, so one big one is, again, climate change. Huge concern, right? Huge concern. So anything we can do to reduce our carbon footprint is going to be helpful. Also supporting organizations that support climate, climate justice. We can also, when we are visiting these tropical areas, we can make sure that we are doing our part to protect our corals. So using reef-safe sunscreen, that's a big one. Those are going to be your physical sunscreens. So using typically it's zinc oxide as a physical barrier against the sun instead of using chemicals. I know that physical sunscreens can be maybe not the best because they do tend to be very thick and you can kind of like affect the way your skin looks, especially if you have darker skin. It can look kind of ashy, not looking super supportive. Even on me, I'm very pale, and even on me, it does tend to kind of like, kind of end up with that shadow cast on your skin. However, it is going to provide you really good protection from the sun, and it's going to be helpful for our reefs. Also, if you are diving or snorkeling, making sure that you're not adding to the stress on those corals. So not standing on them, right? Not pulling pieces off, not doing anything to cause those corals undue stress is going to be helpful. And same if you're boating, making sure that you're monitoring where you're at, you're not running into those reefs or doing anything to damage them. Also, good to keep in mind, corals do have stinging cells like sea anemones and jellyfish. So especially if you're in bare feet, it's not going to be great for you to touch. So you do want to be very, very careful about that. So protecting our coral reefs, even if you are not in one of these coastal areas, are going to be very, very important so that we can continue to have these coastal areas to enjoy. And that we're supporting all the life. So my videos that I have, these are from our tanks here at Butterfly Pavilion. They're not it's not out in the wild, but even in our tanks, you can see right now we've got a ton of life in this tank. These are mushroom corals in the background. That's a tube anemone with the big long tentacles. But in here we have a bunch of these are amphipods. They are tiny little crustaceans. They're kind of like the cleanup crew of the ocean. And then there's a little sexy shrimp right there waving its tail. That's how they get their name. And we do have some fish who live in our tanks as well, sea urchins. And so even in our controlled environments that we have, they are closed environments, but they're going to be really, really, even here, the coral does support our animals. It gives them places to hide in their tanks. And it really adds to the beauty of these tanks as well. So let me check my chat, see if I got any questions in here. Don't think so. All right, friends. Well, I am just about out of time. So again, if you have questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. I can always answer them later. Also, I did want to remind you, next month, we're going to be talking about my favorite invertebrate, which is the horseshoe crab. So on May 12th, 11 a.m. live. If you can't catch it live, you can always catch the recording. We're going to be talking about the incredible horseshoe crab. They are my favorite invertebrate. They're probably, if I had to answer, say my favorite animals here at Butterfly Pavilion. And so we're going to be talking about them, their weird natural history, why they look the way that they look, and why we should care about them. Again, going to the coast to check out these horseshoe crabs. So thank you all so much for joining. I hope you have a wonderful day, and hopefully I'll see you in May when we talk about horseshoe crabs. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you next month.